访华当天迎来两国建交74周年，他说
I'm always amazed about the development of China.
赞赏双边合作，他说
We can trust each other when we talk about trade, when we talk about business, when we talk about innovation.
面对气候变化等全球性挑战，他说
You have to share the problems and you only have common solutions to them.
芬兰总统斯图布接受高端访谈独家专访，敬请收看。
关注国际焦点，洞察世界风云。大家好，欢迎来到本期的高端访谈，我是邹韵。10月28号。芬兰总统斯图布抵达北京，开启了为期4天的访华之旅。而当天呢，也正好是中芬建交74周年纪念日。就任芬兰总统后首次访华，他对于双边合作的下一步发展有哪些期待？对于两国面向未来的新型合作伙伴关系，他有怎样的解读？而面对时代变局，他又希望如何深化多边协作，携手应对全球性挑战呢？今天我们一起在对话中寻找答案。
Mr. President, good morning, and thank you for joining us on Leaders Talk. Well, this is your first state visit to China as the president of Finland, and I noticed that what is very impressive is the day of your arrival here in Beijing coincides with the 74th anniversary of diplomatic relations between our two nations. So at the start of our dialogue, do you mind sharing a bit about this trip and maybe highlight some key moments for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice when a state visit is somehow framed with the big numbers and dates. And of course, it just shows the history of our relations. I mean, Finland is a fairly young nation. We gained our independence in 1917, and then we forged diplomatic relations 74 years ago with China. That, of course, also was linked to commercial relations. And there's been this sort of element of trust over history. I mean, Finland is an unoffensive country. We don't have a colonial past. You know, we're quite cooperative. I think you can sense that in Finnish-Chinese relations over time. And of course, for me personally as president, it was very interesting to come here at a time when the world order is changing, when there is conflict and competition, and we're trying to figure out, okay, you know, how do we do cooperation? What is the power balance in the world? What's China's place in the world? And of course, for me, you know, because we have a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia, Russia was a big part of the security discussion as well. So in many ways, I think it's been a very successful visit.
What would be some of the outcomes that you would describe as some of the major outcomes for your visit?
For me personally, it's a more deep and profound understanding for what China stands for and China's role in the world. So I come home from this visit, I would argue, with a better understanding of what's going on in China and the world.
What's going on in China that is a little bit different than what you have expected? One thing that surprised you the most?
I still am always amazed about the development of China because, of course, I've been to China, Shanghai, Chengdu, and other places. Always there's that next level when I come back.
Terveisiä luotijunasta Pekingistä Shanghai.
10月30日，斯图布乘坐高铁从北京前往上海，并在社交媒体上分享了自己体验中国高铁的视频。继挪威首相斯特勒之后，斯图布是今年第2位打卡中国高铁的北欧国家领导人。与夫人一起游览故宫，同清华大学师生交流教育合作。访华期间，斯图布不断在社交媒体上记录着中国之行的点点滴滴。
You met with President Xi yesterday with in-depth exchanges on some of the key issues concerning bilateral relations and global issues as well. So what were some of your major takeaways from those meetings?
Yeah, we spent the better part of 3 hours together, and we had met twice before when I was foreign minister and the president was vice president. So, you know, we knew each other, and I think we have good dynamics in the conversation. We can talk very openly about things.
Well, during the meeting, President Xi emphasized the exceptional value of this future-oriented, new type cooperative partnership and also the need to further cherish and advance it. What is your understanding of this uniqueness of this partnership, and what is your vision in the next phase of it?
Well, I'm always realistic about these things. You know, China, 1.4 billion people. Finland, 5.5 million people. So there's a slight difference of scale here. And of course, for a country like Finland, it's important to have good relations with big players, major powers like China. The uniqueness comes from the fact that I think we can trust each other. You know, when we talk about trade, when we talk about business, when we talk about innovation. So that's why I had 25 companies here with me from Finland. We have 250 companies that are established here in China, including, for instance, Kone. A lot of Chinese people go up and down with the people flow in elevators and escalators made in Finland or made in China and serviced in China. So there are a lot of, you know, good ties on that front. So it's always good when you come to a country which has such an important role in world politics to learn and live, and that's where the uniqueness comes from. There are no sort of taboos in our relationship, which is good.
Mm-hmm. You previously said that Finland regards China as a land of opportunity or development opportunities, and just now, as you mentioned, that you brought a big business delegation with you this time around. And I noticed that tomorrow you'll be attending a business forum. So in which areas do you see the greatest potential for future cooperation?
You know, we're talking a lot about tech. We talk about green technology, we talk about green transition, there's some sort of basic industrial policies, so a lot of those things. But I'd also like to stress that we did forge a really good partnership between the 24 universities of applied sciences in Finland and Tsinghua University here in Beijing. I very strongly believe in exchange and understanding. So for instance, on the student side, we have 3,000 to 4,000 Chinese students in Finland, but we only have 200 to 300 Finnish students in China. So, you know, I'm going to go home and give some recommendations and suggestions. Say, hey, why don't you go and do an exchange in China? Because you learn something. You live in a different culture, the different perspective on life, and you probably come out of that experience much richer.
Well, speaking of cultural and people-to-people exchanges, actually this time a major move is that China offers a visa-free entry to Finland. How do you understand its significance?
I think it's great. We really, really appreciate that. And you know, it came as a little bit of a surprise. I mean, I'd heard that some
pleasant surprise?
Very pleasant surprise. So I had heard that some European states had the same treatment. So when the president told me, I was, you know, said xie. I was very appreciative. Then I talked to some of our businesses in the evening when we had a reception afterwards, and they were super excited because they said that for them, you know, just to travel to China was always complicated.
Oh, China now is advancing its modernization through new quality productive forces. Is a concept proposed by President Xi, which underlines innovative and more eco-friendly growth drivers. So given that kind of development model and also Finland's expertise in innovation and technology, how do you think both countries can achieve more mutually beneficial cooperation on that front?
Well, again, it does come from innovation, so you need to have the financial instruments to innovate, and then from that emerges innovation. Of course, climate environment is a key example of where this needs to be done, because we know that we are overstretching the capacity of the planet to sustain, for instance, CO2 emissions. So we need to have innovative ways of, you know, moving, of consuming energy, of consuming electricity. In Finland, we're very good on electricity. I think it's over 90, even 95%, which is basically clean, so no CO2. There's nuclear, there's hydro, there are different diverse ways of producing electricity. Whereas on the heating side, I think all of us still have to work. So I think we're all in this boat together, and I'm sure that Finnish-Chinese cooperation in this field will be fruitful. That's why I had my Minister of Environment and Climate here in China as well.
芬兰位于欧洲北部，与瑞典、挪威、俄罗斯接壤。 南临芬兰湾，西濒波蒂尼亚湾。芬兰1/3的国土在北极圈内，极光举世闻名，更有千湖之国的美称。中芬传统友谊深厚，芬兰是最早同新中国建交的西方国家之一，也是首个与我国签订政府间贸易协定的西方国家。我国连续多年成为芬兰在亚洲最大贸易伙伴。芬兰是我国在北欧地区第3大贸易伙伴。
As we said, that this year marks the 74th anniversary. Next year will be the big year, which is the 75th anniversary, which is a milestone event. How do you look forward to bring this bilateral relation to an even higher level?
Well, I of course hope that we'll have a lot of visitors from China coming to Finland, and then vice versa. That's always a good sort of start, because I feel that when there's so-called high-level visits, ministers or otherwise, then always something happens. So here, for instance, we had a little bit over 10 memorandums of understanding, state to state, so China, Finland, and then we had a little bit less than 20 business-to-business type of agreement.
What about the travelers from China who are interested to visit Finland in the future, to take a look? I've been there once and was really breathtaking views there.
Yeah, no, Finland is a lot about nature, and it's a very clean country. There are basically 3 destinations of tourism that I would look at. One is the Lake District. We have over 100,000 lakes. One is the archipelago. We have over 100,000 islands. And then one is Lapland. So that's the nature side. Then, of course, cities, which our cities are quite compact and easy to deal with. So it should be a fairly easy place to travel.
Mr. President, as we said, this is the 3rd time you had meeting with President Xi, and the last time being about 14 years ago. Yeah. So how do you view President Xi as a leader, and how do you understand his political philosophy?
We do have good conversational chemistry. What I draw back from my meetings with the president in 2009 and 2010, when he was vice president, was this sort of thirst for knowledge about international relations and a capacity to have an open conversation about it. Of course, in 14, 15 years, the world has changed. We had the financial crisis in Europe. China has emerged from an emerging power to a major power. We had the asylum crisis in Europe. We've had the emergence of right-wing and left-wing populism in Europe. We've had COVID, and now we have a war in Ukraine, and of course a war in Palestine and Lebanon, and a war in Sudan. So a lot of things are happening. The world order is changing, and in that sense, the president of China has been a good companion to discuss both similarities and differences in how we view the world at the moment.
You've previously depicted China as a strategic, patient, and intelligent power. And you've been here before, many years ago, and this time here again. What are some of the major changes that you witnessed in this country, and how do you understand its modernization?
Yeah, when I talk about China as a patient power, it's a sort of traditional saying that a century is only one page in history. There is this sort of innate capacity to wait for something to happen, which a lot of emerging powers don't necessarily have. There's always this urgency to grow elsewhere, and I understand that. Finland went from rags to riches in about 100 years, from being one of the poorest nations in Europe when we gained independence in 1917, to now look at all the rankings, not to speak of happiness and other things. Finland is there. So I guess we were patient with the way in which we grew, but there are a lot of emerging economies that are not patient. And I also think that you're very strategic in the sense that, I look at your big plans, so Global Development Initiative and Global Security Initiative, Belt and Road Initiative. They're all very planned and strategic.
Because you previously mentioned that today's world is characterized by unrest, disorder, and significant change with uncertain outcomes. And given the major initiatives proposed by President Xi that you just mentioned, how do you understand the significance of those initiatives in promoting common development?
What we had during the Cold War was a bipolar world, Soviet Union and the United States. What we had post-Cold War was a unipolar world led by the United States. Now we have a multipolar world. I don't have a problem with the multipolar world, but I think it is quite clear that if it's not backed up by a multilateral world, it leads to chaos, disorder, and conflict. So we need common international rules in common international institutions. And my big argument is that we need to give more agency and power, especially to the global south, if we want to solve the big problems of this world: climate change, demography or immigration, technology, pandemics, or sustainable development. You can't do these alone. You have to share the problems, and you only have common solutions to them. And this means that we need to maintain the current rules, which I think are good, but we need to change the current power structure, which means more power to the global south.
What do you think we should do in order to deal with the challenges that are faced with increasing anti-globalization sentiment, as well as, let's say, protectionism?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to do them within the framework and context of big international institutions, such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the IMF, International Monetary Fund.
You also said in your speech at the UN that many countries are rejecting multilateral cooperation at precisely the time when we need it more than ever. What kind of message were you trying to send by then?
I'm very impressed with your research. My message is very simple. You know, after the Cold War ended, we spoke about the end of history, that all of the countries, 200 of them in this world, would revert to some kind of a combination of liberal democracy, globalization, and social market economy. Well, it didn't happen. We forgot that sometimes we don't all share the same values, but we're all driven by quite nationalistic interests. And that's what we can see right now, whether it's in the global West, global East, or global South. A lot of countries define their foreign policy and existence based on interests, and then they turn inbound. We start seeing tariffs and protectionism coming in. So the whole idea and the concept of, you know, sharing the world goes to what is mine, how can I protect what I have? And we need to get out of this mindset. And this means, of course, compromise for everyone, not only the West, where, you know, we make a lot of mistakes, not only the East, and not only the South. Everyone needs to find compromises, to find common solutions to common problems.
2024年2月，亚历山大·斯图布当选芬兰总统。此前，他曾任欧洲议会议员、芬兰外交部长、财政部长、外贸与欧洲事务部长以及芬兰总理。在总统就职演说中，他表示，全球合作对于应对气候变化、解决冲突、促进经济增长、增进福祉等至关重要。
Speaking of the European Union, Mr. President, EU is experiencing many major shifts and changes in 2024, such as a sharp right turn in the election of the parliament. So given that you once served as a member of the parliament, given that you've authored 15 out of 19 books on the EU, and also given that your PhD thesis focuses on the flexible integration of the EU, how do you think the new EU institutions should act or respond to the increasing criticism, doubts among its member states on EU policies?
I don't necessarily agree with the thesis that there was a big move to a populist right. I think in Europe there has been a move to extremes, both left and right. And there's sort of a lack of moderate center. And we're seeing it being ignored from both sides. And a lot of it is about, you know, disinformation and facts. So how do I see it? Well, I think the first thing to understand is that Europe is imperfect. There's no such thing as a perfect society. So the European Union always advances on three phases. First, there's a crisis. Secondly, there's chaos. And thirdly, there's a suboptimal solution. And what populists often do is they try to find simple solutions to complicated problems. And you can't have those. And of course now, in a world where information is so plenty, it's quite difficult for us human beings to decipher between what's wrong and right. And because we have very avid social media, which have algorithms skewed in an extreme right or extreme left direction, it becomes quite problematic. But just one gentle reminder, the European Union exists for 4 very simple reasons: peace, prosperity, security, and stability. It's an imperfect union, which is more than an international organization, but less than a state. And this is the mess that we're trying to solve in Europe. It's never pretty, but it seems to be working quite well.
Mr. President, correct me if I'm wrong, because I kind of get impression in this process of preparing for this interview that when you served as the foreign minister, the prime minister, and now as the president of Finland, it seems that you're very passionate and interested in building kind of a nation brand for Finland in order to increase its popularity, its familiarity, as well as appeal to the rest of the world. So if that's the case, what are some of the core values and qualities are you trying to define Finland?
Well, I guess the starting point is that, Finland is a country that you can trust. We're simple, straightforward. So you can trust the Finnish handshake. So if I were to leave a brand or an image of a country, it would be one into which it's easy to travel, with which it's easy to do business with, a country that you can feel very hospitable in. I remember when I started in politics, and I still say that I'm fairly new because I only entered politics in 2004, so I was already at that stage, I think 36. But when I came into politics, I wanted to bring the world into Finland. I wanted to internationalize Finland. That's why I was passionate about Europe. Now it's sort of the reverse. I want to bring Finland to the world because I think we have a fairly functional society. I do it with all modesty, but there are a few key tenets and values that work in our society. They have to do with equality between men and women, have to do with justice, have to do with freedom, have to do with openness, because I believe that open societies actually self-correct themselves and work.
And finally, Mr. President, you are known as a keen sports person, or even Ironman, since you have competed and won in triathlons. And I just wonder, how do you think those extreme and tough games have influenced you as a person, or maybe even your approach to politics and leadership?
Yeah, I guess you need endurance and perseverance and grit. And in Finnish, there's a word which was quoted by President Xi yesterday, which is sisu, S-I-S-U, sisu. It means exactly that you have stamina, that you continue even sometimes you feel that there's a headwind and you're tired and you don't want to do it. And you say, you know what, let's just grind through this, we'll make it. That's what sports has brought for me in politics.
That's actually also something I'm very curious about, because in those games, there must be a moment or many moments that you feel, oh, I'm reaching my limit, or in your own words, is my legs become logs, I'm barely able to run. So during those defining moments, is there like a specific thought or person that you think of that keep you motivated or keep you going?
I'm probably in some kind of a zone. And usually in big competitions, I just grind it through. I mean, there is this moment at any given time where you think that, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it. But then I think about,
that's actually when you were at the triathlon.
That's an old one. But the other one is, no, those are old pictures. That's a bit more modern, yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, I think about crossing the finishing line. And I have to admit that usually it's gone quite well. And at the end of the day, it's the beer that you have after the race with your friends which motivates me.
What do you think are the biggest gains that you get from sports all those years? I'm
a big believer in the connection between body and mind. You need to train the body as we age and cells die. And there are things that you can do, which means you exercise, you sleep, and you eat well. And then you need to train the mind. And if the two are in some kind of a harmony, I think that gives you a meaningful and hopefully a happy life.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for sharing with us your insights and for giving us this opportunity to talk to you. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
在专访当中，斯图布总统表示，本次访华之旅当中，他见证了中国的发展成就。他表示，期待芬中两国进一步深化经贸、绿色能源等领域的务实合作。他还说，当今世界面临多重全球性挑战，多边合作更应该成为时代发展的主旋律。芬方愿为推动欧中关系顺利发展发挥积极作用。感谢您收看本期的高端访谈，我是邹韵，我们下期再会。